Mercedes Rois Díaz is a consultant on forest bioeconomy with extensive research and management experience, having worked for 17 years at the European Forest Institute. Her main field of expertise is agroforestry systems, with interest in motivations and barriers of the farmers, the forest owners, for the implementation of agroforestry practices, including the policies that may impact that implementation, and the transfer of scientific results to farmers and forest owners, with a special focus on the links to the circular bioeconomy. She has extensive experience in diverging issues such as digitalization of the forest sector and the impact of social innovations towards sustainable development goals. In the last few years, she's developed an interest in raising awareness and education for youth on the possibilities of bioeconomy, and thus joining a community of bioheroes with the aim of raising awareness on the bioproducts and the bioeconomy. And just recently, she joined the community of European Climate Pact ambassadors who inform, inspire, and support climate actions in their communities and networks. And with that, let me turn it over to Mercedes.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you to UFRO Task Force on non-timber forest products and all the organizers, in particular to you for inviting me here today to be part of this webinar series, which is very timely and very relevant. And I will try to share my screen. Wait a second. Sorry. I thought I had it open, but it's coming soon.
It's almost there. There we go.
Okay, here it is.
Just hit the play, we're good to go.
Can you see it?
Yes, looks perfect.
Okay, good.
I'm gonna...
Okay, so I will talk about non-timber forest products in agroforestry. And I will structure the presentation into a general context, and then talk about what is agroforestry, some types and products, some examples, and then move to the driving forces for farmers and foresters to implement agroforestry. I will touch quite many points. I might go quick, but then we have some time to go into more details at the end of the presentation for the discussion. Europe is characterized by a rural landscape. You can see the green and the blue dots in the map. 80% is rural area, about 40% is agriculture, 42% is forestry. And in these rural areas, we have about 30% of the population living in there. And there have been two main challenges in rural areas. On one hand, it was the rural land abandonment along the years. The aging of the farmers without young generations, because of lack of opportunities, the difficulties of the work, and searching for other alternatives. But then also, on the other hand, it's the agricultural intensification. This has allowed to increase the food availability, but has imposed some other challenges like the eutrophication, pollution, and the greenhouse gas emissions. And this has led to rural areas that they are not so resilient. They have been more prone to fires, and we have lost quite much biodiversity. In general, we face 5 main global environmental concerns. One is obviously climate change, then the lack of resources. We have been extracting more resources than the earth can replenish every year. The food loss or waste along the whole value chains, from the production to our homes, and biodiversity loss and the degradation of the territory. Actually, for this year, the UN has signaled 5 main topics, and one of them is the climate crisis, no? among other 4. By 2050, we expect rising population by 9 billion people. So we will need more food, more water, and more energy. So what is the solution? The solution goes to a circular bioeconomy, transforming this linear fossil economy into a circular bioeconomy based on the natural renewable resources within the boundaries of our planet. And within that, agroforestry has been recognized as a sustainable farming system, a land use that is offers some activities that can help to stimulate these rural areas by providing additional employment and financial revenue, but still in a sustainable way, and therefore should be promoted because of providing environmental services and this efficient use of the resources. So what is agroforestry? Agroforestry is a practice where we integrate the woody vegetation, being trees or shrubs, with crops or animals. And we benefit from the interaction between those. And depending on which component we use more, we have different practices, or systems. We will refer to agroforestry practice as setting a plot, and a system will conform it on the farm level. We have, for example, high nature value agroforestry. They are in open forests, like the Díaz in Spain or the Montado in Portugal, parklands in the UK, and they have been managed in an extensive way for many years, and they have a high biodiversity. We can have, for example, agroforestry for high value trees, where the main component are the trees with high value, like, for example, cherry or juglans, in an intensive way. Arable agroforestry when we combine the trees with some crops, like some cereals or others. Or livestock agroforestry, where we combine the trees with some different types of livestock. Depending on the land where we have the agroforestry, we have different types of agroforestry. On agricultural land, we can have the silvopasture, the wood pastures that I mentioned, the meadow orchards in raising fruit trees like apples or vineyards, and the hedgerows that have been quite present in our landscape traditionally. We have also the silvoarable with the alley cropping, as I mentioned before, and then the riparian buffer strips along the rivers. In the forest, we have 2 types. One is the silvopasture, with the livestock grazing under the trees, or the forest farming, where we produce different food or medicinal species. And also in the urban and peri-urban land, we have some home gardens. The main drivers of the ecosystem services degradation have been agricultural intensification and land abandonment, as we mentioned before. And research has recognized agroforestry as a multifunctional land system where we provide or safeguard multiple ecosystem services, no? Ranging from provisioning of different agricultural and forestry products with non-commodity outputs like climate regulation, fire prevention, aesthetic values, or maintaining biodiversity and creating soil. So this is following the thickest classification. No? So I will highlight the diversification and the resilience and the land use efficiency and productivity. And it's recognized as a powerful tool to mitigate and adapt to climate change. In Europe, it has been a traditional land use practice, and but because of those changes we mentioned, no? Land abandonment and intensification either of agriculture or forestry, it has been disappearing. But since the 1990s, it has again increasing attention. So we are seeing catch up of those systems. And we have a great variety of systems because of the variety in the natural conditions, on the legislation, and the culture. There have been some recent studies that have identified the area where there are agroforestry systems in Europe. If we consider only trees, there are about 15 million hectares of agroforestry systems in Europe, and most of it is a silvopastoral system, and especially in the Mediterranean area. If we consider also shrubs, then the area will rise up to about 20 million hectares, no? And this means 3% of the total area, or 8%, a bit less than 10% of the agricultural area in Europe. I would like to briefly draw your attention to some policies that address agroforestry or initiatives. One is the Agenda for Sustainable Development, and there has been some research, and agroforestry addresses at least 9 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The European Bioeconomy Strategy identifies agroforestry as one of the farming systems that can be promoted. No? The bioeconomy is based on renewable resources, and actually any product from fossil fuel can be made from biomass. Therefore, agroforestry, with all the different components, as we will see, has a great potential, no, to provide resources. And well, the bioeconomy strategy also focuses on the cascade use and using the products and materials as long as possible. The European Green Deal that aims to meet Europe as a climate neutral continent by 2050, and it has developed several strategies that affect agroforestry. One is from farm to fork strategy, more concentrated on food, and the biodiversity strategy that explicitly mentions that agroforestry should be promoted, and the forest strategy with the initiative planting 3 billion trees that can be planted additionally to the business as usual, and they can be planted in any type of land. The Common Agricultural Policy is the main policy in Europe that affects agriculture, so it impacts directly on agroforestry. And in the new post-2020 CAP, which is being now negotiated, in principle, there will be no tree limits for agroforestry, which has been a limit in the past to the implementation, as we will see. Other initiatives that address agroforestry is the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance. It's an alliance between different actors, governments, research, industry. They want to accelerate this transition to circular bioeconomy, and the 10-point action plan includes agroforestry, the same as the Terra Carta, which gives the rights to nature, that put nature in the heart of our economy. Then the sustainable carbon cycles that wants to upscale carbon farming, and that the farmers and foresters will receive more income for sustainable practices increasing carbon in their land, the Rural Pack and Rural Agenda, and then recently, a few days ago, it has launched the Regenerative Fashion Manifesto, which aims at the fashion industry to promote, to defend regenerative practices. What is the relation between agroforestry and non-timber forest products? Well, we can have products from different components in agroforestry. Here I will mention some examples. For example, in forests, when besides of the biomass from the trees, we have the sap from the birch or maple. The birch provides us the xylitol. This it can be a drink or a sweetener, and is much healthier than any other sugar. It has been gaining quite attention nowadays. It has been used for many years, for example, in Finland, but not in Spain. The juice can be also made from spruce needles. The cork can provide insulation, or it can be used for transport because it's very, for vehicles, because it's very light. Or the resins from the pines can be used for walks, paints. From the animals, we can have textile fibers from sour milk, for example, or the wool that is used for textiles or for insulation. The dairy can be used in probiotics and natural preservatives, biostimulants. From agriculture, we can obtain carbon fibers, we can have biodiesel, or even from agricultural byproducts or waste, we can transform it into biogas, biochar, which is an amendment for the soil. Bioplastics, we can have from sugar beet, we can get cellulose for personal care products, etc. And even if fruits or vegetables that they are not good for human consumption can be used for other animals like the snails. From Galicia, I would like to mention some examples, but not only from Galicia, but a few, because, well, it's the region I am originally from. It is in the northwestern part of Spain. It has 2 million of hectares as forest, and it covers about 70%, 60-70% of the total land. Galician forest covers 7% of the Spanish forest area, but it provides 50% of the Spanish timber, about 10 million cubic meters. So you can see it's one of the main forest area in Spain. It is, the forest is mainly based on private hands. 97% is private. 30% of this is from a type of communal forest that they have a higher, a bigger area as average. I mean the holdings. And recently, last year, the Galician forest plan was updated. and it is aiming at, well, to the carbon neutrality, no? And just an example, it aims at doubling the silvopastoral area in Galicia. About forest certification, it has been a high increase in the last years, both under PEF and FSC, the both seals for certification, no? And actually under the PEF system, because of this private ownership, no, 70% of the forest owners in Spain that have certified forests are in Galicia, no? And the average is about 2 hectares of property. For example, one of the non-timber forest products that we can get, no, are the mushrooms, and we can have the wild mushrooms, the boletus, the truffles, but also these cultivated mushrooms, no, as we could see this forest farming, no, and it's becoming quite popular. In Galicia, we have some examples with lepistanuda, or the shiitake and the oyster, no? And we grow those on logs from chestnuts or oaks, but also nowadays there have been some innovation in eucalyptus in the stumps where they want to remove those eucalyptus to convert it to another type of forest. And for example, a log of 20 kilos will give about 4 kilos of shiitake, no? Which is about 20% of the weight. And there is a price market about 15–18 euros per kilo, no? It's quite an interesting practice. In Finland, similarly, they have been also growing shiitake and oyster, but mainly in underbergs, but also some alder or oak, no? Basically on logs. There are some, these are edible mushrooms, but we can also produce medicinal mushrooms like linseed or chaga. In the case of chaga, for example, it is inoculated in the living trees, in the living birches, and those will be extracted in thinnings that will not have like a much value, will be for firewood. But when you grow this medicinal mushroom, you can obtain for the same log about 100 euros. So it increases a lot the profitability, no? And it will be a management system in any case for the thinnings. Another practice that is very common in Galicia is with chestnuts. They are autochthonous species here, and it has been quite important species. It has diminished, but now it's catching up again, a growing interest because of this multifunctionality and the economic viability. And we have been combining with Celtic pigs. It's a traditional breed that went almost to extinction, and it is now being recovered and feeds on the chestnuts, for example, no? But it can be also growing under pines, as you can see in the right-hand picture. The chestnut production in Galicia is about 20 million kilos per year with a market value of 50 million euros. So you can see that is an important production. And in the forest plan by 2040, for the chestnut forest, it aims at restoring about 8,000 hectares and creating a new 8,000 hectares for chestnut production and another 8,000 for timber productions, because the varieties, they are different. You can see in the third picture a marron glacé. This is a transformed chestnut with Sugars, very sweet, but it gives a high value to the high added value to the chestnut. Another practice that is also very common here is the horse with pines, and there have been some studies, no, that under Pinus radiata it has increased 25% of the productivity, no, because it allows this extra meat production. It helps to decrease the clearing costs. Instead of using mechanical clearing, you can do it with livestock, no, and this helps to decrease the fire risk. Also, there is a better feed quality because the shrubs will not grow so well as if they are cleared with mechanical clearing, but the horses help to transform it into more edible grasses. And this also facilitates the management, no, for pruning and thinning. And it has even increased biodiversity when we have rotational grazing. This Acorns is an example of another product that is quite interesting. It has been rather lost along the ages, but for example, in Montado do Freixo do Meio, it's this one of those open forests, and they have about 400 hectares with different practices, and they produce quite many products that they sell in a shop from their Montado, from the Acorns. It can be like a tea or the cookies, the bread, or even hamburger out of Acorns, no? There is even a liquor from Acorns, which is very good. It's very sweet, looks like hazelnut, and there is no alcohol on it. And Ramats de Foc, it's a brand. This is the fire risk management with pastures that they are implemented in Catalonia, in the other side of Spain. No, they are called like the fire flocks. No, they are these herds of sheep that they are managed, grazing in different forests. And the products that they are obtained from those, being yogurts, meat, or milk, or some other, they are identified with that brand, with that seal. And there is even a map where you can find those products in different shops or restaurants that serve those products. No? So the consumer can be aware of demanding such products. There is also urban agroforestry, where the livestock grazes in big parks. It can be, there are some examples in Madrid, in New York, in Germany, in different areas. No, it's becoming also a popular activity where the livestock grazes these areas instead of having to do it mechanically. No? And the certification, they can certify not only the sustainable forest management as such, but also the products, all the products that they come from those forests. And in this case, we can have a certified ham or honey. Actually, it was this year that it was certified the first honey from certified forests in Europe, Miel de Muria. There are also truffles or cork, and I think this is quite an important issue, no, on the labeling. And also, there are some ecosystem services certified. For example, we have in Galicia one forest, the Besada Rogueira, which is certified for their value, their management for biodiversity conservation. No? It's the first in Spain that certifies ecosystem services, the second in Europe, the first one is in Italy. It was 2 years ago. And also in Galicia, we have some forests, public forests, certified for the carbon sequestration with the proper calculation of the carbon. And we can move now to the perception by farmers. This is, you can read more details in the article that has been published in Agroforestry Systems. And as I said, no, Europe is characterized by rural landscape, and there has been this land abandonment. No? So agroforestry could help to stimulate the rural areas, but to promote this uptake, we need to know what are the constraints for the farmers. No? How do they see it, so that we can develop some appropriate policies. No? So the aim of this study was to assess which factors act for and against the adoption of agroforestry. No? And it was performed across Europe within the project of Forward. We have stratified the sample, and after that, we took random respondents. No, first we stratified according to the agroforestry system, either high nature and cultural value, high valued trees and arable agroforestry, and livestock agroforestry. And also we did interviews to people that were doing agroforestry, but also those that they were not doing agroforestry, and they were working on the same type of production. No? We performed 183 interviews in total. So the research question was why is agroforestry accepted or not? And the questionnaire had simple questions and complex questions. Simple questions like the farm characteristics, no? About the size that they apply subsidies, and what is the personal information about age, gender, occupation. And the complex questions were they were open, and we could discuss with them about their farm characteristics, no? How they obtain the farm, which type of land, crops and animals they have, what is the share, whether they have landscape feature, whether they apply greening measures, what is the diversification, no? Whether they aim to maintain permanent grasslands or change it, and why, no? Also on the agroforestry farms, the same, and also including the type of implementation, why they move into that, the perceptions. We ask them perceptions on the production and the environment and social aspects. And we also gave some more explanation about it to the people that they didn't know, and we asked once again about the perceptions, no, and the willingness to try agroforestry, and about also the labeling need. We use for this the thematic narrative analysis, or the ground theory. Is a strategy for categorizing qualitative data. No, we were doing that data review and sorting it into categories. It helps moving from raw data to patterns and developing things. No, it's a process that goes in several phases. No, and the codes that we give to the data, we keep comparing them to each other to identify similarities and differences, and therefore finding patterns and moving from a low level of abstraction to major themes, no, that relate, that answer our research question. No? We assisted this analysis with a software which is MaxQDA. It assists organizing, grouping, and structuring, but the interpretation is done by the researcher. No? So what is the concept of agroforestry by the farmers? Well, the most common concept is a combination of trees and other crops and animals, like a basic definition. No? Then there were variations depending on what they knew, what they had close to them. And some farmers, they have a very comprehensive knowledge, no, about it. But in general, we could perceive that the concept was not clear or even never heard. Actually, farmers that they applied agroforestry, they didn't know that they were applying agroforestry. And this gives us the information that we need to improve the communication and education for farmers and also for the advisors. No? The driving forces in conventional farming, they were mainly three. With the dots, you can see in which countries those answers were present, but not necessarily the intensity. No? So the main driving factors to use conventional farming was the tradition, what they know, what it has been in the region. Also, the lack of knowledge on agroforestry. They might have implemented more sustainable practices like organic farming, but they didn't have the knowledge on agroforestry. And then also the easier management of conventional farming. Having animals is, for example, more complicated, no, for the regeneration of the forest or to collect the animals from the forest. The animals are not compatible, for example, when we spray the fruit trees, no, the space for mechanization. The driving forces for agroforestry farmers, then we can also highlight three of them, which is the tradition, no, what they know in the family, the region, no, for cultural reasons, and because they know the benefits of the synergies. Learning from other peers, that has been quite important reason. No? They knew agroforestry either in a meeting or because they have been working abroad. They have some colleagues that implemented or even from the internet, and they saw that it is viable and they are it gives more benefits, no? And the diversification of products. We can obtain wood, fodder, meat, milk, crops. So it increases the production and the profitability of the farm. There are several lines of income, no? So they reduce the risk from market or climate uncertainties. And they also reduce the cost from land clearing, and they have highlighted the high quality products they obtain. No? The key barriers, as we mentioned, they have seen that the farm management is difficult, it's more time demanding, there are high costs for example, for the planting, for protectors of the trees, for fencing against wild animals, or for fencing with rotational grazing. The natural regeneration is not so easy. Then the bureaucracy and the regulation, no? It's an administrative burden, and there has been a slow response from the administration. There have been quite many limitations, for example, with the CAP, is the Common Agricultural Policy. For example, in agricultural area, if there are more than 100 trees per hectare, that will not be eligible anymore, etc. And there have been some other limitations. And then the lack of knowledge. No, they didn't know, many of them, that there will be some subsidies to implement agroforestry. The technical aspects, the design, the combination of the species, and also they don't know whether it is profitable. No. So we could conclude, well, that tradition is a main driver both for conventional farming and agroforestry. The knowledge of successful practices from other cases is a key driver. The lack of awareness, of course, leads to wrong assumptions, no? And it was interesting to hear that they will be willing to try once we explain more in detail about agroforestry to the conventional farmers. They will be willing to try. It's important that there are some subsidies that help the farmers to move into agroforestry, and the extension services are very much needed to inform farmers and foresters about the different possibilities, and raising awareness of consumers is also essential to demand those products and that the farmers see a niche for those. You can have more information under these projects, Affinet and Vanguard, both European projects with lots of information. My PhD thesis is also there mentioned. And thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, then I will be happy to discuss it.
Very good, very extensive, very comprehensive assessment of agroforestry. We do have a few questions. Let me just go to the Q&A box and let's see, our first person asks the question, in the US, historical land abandonment has not necessarily been a bad thing, especially ecologically speaking. Can you explain a bit more specifically why land abandonment is a problem in Europe and how agroforestry helps to solve that?
The main thing, I understand that, yeah, of course, everything, it depends to which extent it's abandoned and from which status it comes. But the main issue is that when it is abandoned, it becomes encroached and the bushes start to grow. And especially in the Mediterranean or in the Atlantic, in Galicia, where we have a high growth, this becomes very dense shrubs under the forest. So then the forest fires risk is increasing a lot. And therefore, much of the forest fires come from there, from the abandonment, and this leads to the loss of biodiversity.
Interesting. Tapan asked a question about policy. So you spoke, you mentioned one of your slides, you had several policies laid out, and he's wondering, are there policies that are specifically for agroforestry? And can you talk a little bit more about the policy implications for agroforestry and where that stands in the region?
Mm-hmm. Well, some of them, they are initiatives or strategies. So they are more an orientation than an obligation, no? But what it is, for example, the main driver of agriculture and forestry is the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy in Europe. And this is by, let's say, all the member states, they have to follow. And then, well, this is more for subsidies. Of course, if you apply for subsidies, you have to follow that policy. Then under that CAP, there are two pillars. The pillar 1 is for agricultural land, and the pillar 2 is for rural development. And there are some measures for forestry. So for forestry areas only, there is a measure. In the previous CAP, it was measure 222, it was in 2007, if I am correct. It started 2007, and it offers some subsidies to implement agroforestry areas, but it has not really taken up a lot. Many people, many foresters, they didn't know that this even existed, and also they, for example, in the second period, in the CAP 2014-2020, they changed it. They changed the measure a bit, and they cover the implementation and 5 years maintenance. But the people will receive more years maintenance with simple afforestation. So they chose the other measure, which was only afforestation instead of agroforestry, for example. So
what do you think is the main challenge with integrating agroforestry into land use policy?
I think there are many challenges, no? And farmers were, you could see they will be very willing to do many things, but they encounter a lot of bureaucracy, lots of paperwork. Then, for example, they have some deaths because of the wild animals. They have not been, how to say, compensated soon properly, so they get desmotivated, and they are, in many cases, they will be willing even to close down because it was not worth for them. So they are doing a great value for the society, but they are not receiving a compensation for that. So
cool, very good, thank you. We have a couple more questions that I want to get to. Jinlong in China asks, it is quite common practice that agroforestry developed in ecologically degraded land or fragmented land. So is that the case in Europe? And then who are the owners of the land where agroforestry developed most rapidly? So I guess the question is, do you find more agroforestry on degraded land and land that's been fragmented? And then who owns those land? Who owns that land? What's the typical land tenureship?
Well, the land was not necessarily degraded, but what we have seen from the interviews is that people with high quality soil, they will really want to maximize the benefit, and they go to conventional farming. But when they have like land that is not so easily available, that will not be so profitable, then they consider to why not agroforestry. No, there have been some other studies, not mine, that they have studied in Europe. They have classified with different environmental pressures, and they have analyzed the upscaling of agroforestry, and I think it could reduce, how was it? I think if they applied agroforestry in 10% of that land, the pressures like pollution or biodiversity will be very much decreased. I can search for the article if someone wants to have more details on it. And who owns the area? Well, the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, as I said, it applies mainly to agricultural area. And in our interviews, most of it was in agriculture. But there has been some foresters too, but mainly agriculture.
Interesting. Tiago asked a question, what's the main reason behind the lack of subsidy plans for agroforestry projects in the EU? At least for Portugal, it seems like opportunities have been lacking. So what's the story behind subsidies or the lack of subsidies?
Yeah, there have been some figures that 80% of the subsidies go to about 20% of the major producers. So this, well, this is not applying agroforestry. The agroforestry is mainly applied to small owners, not these big land owners. So I think that I agree, it's a missing opportunity, and I think it should revert the situation.
Diego follows up a little bit on that question. He says, a little bit off topic, but what is the reason for Portugal not to subsidize farmers for preserving grazing areas rich in orchids? So my area fulfills the required conditions by the EU, but unfortunately there's no compensating to preserve that land.
I don't know the particular case about Portugal, but well, to me, it's really a pity. And I really trust that the new policy, the new CAP that is being now negotiated with the different member states, the strategic plans have been submitted and they are under negotiation with the Commission. So I hope there will be new eco schemes that favor agroforestry, that there will be no limits with the tree density, and that the carbon farming is taking up. So it will help to provide subsidies to agroforestry.
Interesting. Dennis Garrity asks the question, you mentioned that natural regeneration is challenging and difficult. Why is that such a challenge? Why is natural regeneration such a challenge?
Well, if you have livestock, if you have sheep, if you have cows, they will really like to eat the oak seeds, the oak planting, no? So that's the thing, no? But well, it can be managed because there have been some trials with rotational grazing. So you fence some area that you want to regenerate, or even if you have planted, you put the protectors, and you can also fence the area and put the livestock in some of the other area. But of course, this is challenging. It implies some extra costs and so on, but it's a matter of management.
So it's not necessarily a biological challenge of regeneration. It's a competition problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Too many hungry animals.
Yes.
Very good. So Zenepe has a general question. And let me see if I can, is it a best solution, developing the bioeconomy in protected areas? Could you speak to that? Is that a good solution? How would the bioeconomy work in sort of protected areas? I've never really thought about using the concept of a bioeconomy in a protected area, but
I have not direct experience with protected areas, but in my understanding, it could be compatible. I think there are some uses. Well, for example, there have been in some Red Natura Natura 2000 network, no, some areas with pines that they were grazed with horses, and it was compatible. And then they were selling the products to nearby restaurants. So I think everything is a matter of finding what is suitable for the area in a sustainable way. And of course, it will not be probably a mass production at all, but it could be quite, it's possible to adapt it and be compatible.
Thank you. We've got time for a couple more questions. Tom asks the question, what is the link between stakeholder knowledge and their perception of agroforestry? And are those that know more about agroforestry more willing to practice agroforestry than their counterparts? So does more knowledge mean more involvement?
Yes, actually, the ones that they had knowledge that they know it because it is typical in the area or because it has been in the family for some ages. They are aware of the benefits and how it is managed, know what they have to take into account, and they are the ones implementing agroforestry, no? So the more knowledge you have, the more chances you get on the agroforestry. For example, also people who got to know some successful cases in other countries or even close in somewhere in the region, they saw the benefits, they saw that this is working, that it's not only about production, but about sustainability, and that is economically viable. Then they were willing to implement it. They actually did it, or they will be willing to try it out.
So really knowledge plays an important role in
Yes,
getting people to do agroforestry. Yeah.
Definitely.
I think we've got two more questions before we shut down for the day. Do you have more information on carbon sequestration in silvopasture systems in relation to traditional livestock? Or is that body of knowledge out there?
There are some articles. I cannot say now some big conclusions, but of course, comparing to agriculture, silvopasture, agroforestry increases carbon uptake because of the trees, the biomass in the trees and in the roots. So it increases a lot. I cannot say now the numbers from my head, and I can find some articles. If the person is interested, then they can write to me and find it out.
Okay, perhaps before we sign off, you could put your email address in the chat box. Because we've had one other request for your contact information. And we've got one more question from Dennis. He's got a follow-up question. So he says, there is enormous interest among large corporations to invest in land restoration for carbon credits. Do you find many or any organizations in Europe that are starting to respond to this demand through agroforestry systems, sort of development of agroforestry?
I know some about forestry, but not necessarily now. I don't have the information on agroforestry projects on this. Now it comes to my head about forestry, afforestation and restoration, but I don't have now in mind one case of agroforestry, but I am pretty sure there are out there.
Seems like it would be a really progressive way for large corporations to sort of start addressing carbon credits and mixing those land use systems.
Yes, actually, well, if I may add, actually the regenerative fashion manifesto that was launched a few days ago by the Sustainable Markets Initiative from High Royal Princess of Wales And the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance, they do want to launch regenerative farming that the fashion brands, they are aware of the bioeconomy and they will implement regenerative farming. And one of the examples they were giving in the manifesto was about agroforestry. So I can foresee this is coming.
Interesting. Well, folks, that kind of brings us to the end of today's webinar. I really appreciate all the great questions. Mercedes, it was a wonderful presentation. I really appreciate it. Very thorough, gives me a really good, better understanding of agroforestry in Europe, and particularly in Spain. It was very good.